From the Oklahoma newsroom, you're watching The Red Zone, our weekly extended look at Oklahoma football. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio, joined by fellow columnist Barry Trammell, OU beat writer Ryan Aber. Guys, we are just a couple days from Oklahoma's opener against Florida Atlantic. That's an 11 o'clock start on Saturday on Fox if you're not headed down to Norman for the game. And my big overwhelming question right now is, are we going to get an OU depth chart before we know the Florida Atlantic starting quarterback, or the other way around? Right now, Ryan, it's looking like a game time decision on both.
Yeah, not only the depth chart, but OU hasn't even selected its captains yet. Lincoln Riley told us on Wednesday night that he preferred to wait a little bit closer to game time to make the captains' decisions, which I don't know. Are they going to pick it at 10:45 on Saturday morning? It's getting pretty tight, but there's still some questions on the depth chart. The assistant coaches we talked to this week wouldn't give anything away, even though we tried with Bill Bedenbaugh and Mike Stoops, especially where a lot of those key position battles are. But it'll be interesting to see who starts for the Sooners and who starts at quarterback for Florida Atlantic as they choose between a couple of D1 cast-offs.
Yeah, and Barry, let's start with OU. We'll get back to Florida Atlantic because that's obviously an interesting part of this equation. Lane Kiffin's offense, who's going to run it. But when it comes to the Oklahoma depth chart, Barry, is it good news that you've got so many position battles that are so up in the air that you have to wait this long to put out a depth chart? Or are there cases where it's likely the opposite? Maybe nobody's really asserted themselves yet.
Well, I think it's always good if you have an established guy. Now, what we don't know is whether there's actually great competition at these, or if they're just playing war games and top secret Secret Service stuff. This not letting out information, not letting out news, that's prevalent throughout all of college football. So we don't know what's really going through their minds. But the truth is, when you look at a place like linebacker, you don't really know. I mean, we don't know who's the better player, so the coaches might not know. Other places in the secondary, the safeties, and those kinds of positions. I mean, it is up in the air. When you got 16 returning starters, 17 returning starters, got a bunch of established players, well, then you don't need a depth chart. But we don't know. We don't know if the coaches know.
Yeah. Ryan, of the position battles that we know exist, or we suspect exist, maybe we should leave it up in the air a little bit more. Is there one that you feel like, even if they had put out a depth chart, even if today it landed in our laps, that might still be an or situation? It is that close from what you know?
Well, I think the safety battles is what I look at when you look at that group of players with Justin Broyles and Jordan Parker fighting for one safety spot, and then Khalil Houghton and a couple other guys in the mix at the other one. I think those are pretty close, and you're going to see all those guys play. The question is, who's going to wind up playing more? I think that's the closest one maybe out of the ones that we know, which are, in addition to the safeties, the weak side linebacker spot between Caleb Kelly and Curtis Bolton. I think that's a little bit of a surprise to most people that Curtis Bolton is still in that mix with Caleb Kelly. And then at center is the one we've talked about all year behind the quarterback battle until that was settled between Jonathan Alvarez and Creed Humphrey. I would be surprised if Creed Humphrey isn't the guy at this point. If you don't know that the senior is going to be the starter at this point, then why not go with the young guy, give him some room to develop. But it's going to be really interesting to see who trots out on the field for that first play on Saturday.
Barry, when it comes to some of these position battles, close or not close in reality, is there one that maybe surprises you that it's still going on, whether it might be that center battle? I mean, as Ryan mentioned, the fact that Caleb Kelly is apparently locked in a position battle, a guy who's been pretty solid as a starter over the last couple of years. Is there a position battle that you're a little surprised is maybe still in the mix?
Well, I'm surprised at the Caleb Kelly story. And I'm like everybody else. I fall victim to the recruiting hype. 5-star recruit, plays as a freshman, has some moments last year. He had the big hit on Georgia that led to Stephen Parker's fumble return for a touchdown that gave the Sooners a chance to win. So just in my mind, I kept thinking, Caleb Kelly's going to be a really good player. But we're still sort of waiting for that, and I think the coaches are waiting for that. And while they're waiting, they're thinking, you know what, we'll run Curtis Bolton out there because he can play too. So that's the one that surprises me most.
Well, especially when you look at Curtis Bolton's career, he's been injured a couple times, was a big-time special teams player for him a couple years ago, made a few plays on the defensive side, but maybe he's better than we're giving him credit for. But at the same time, Caleb Kelly, I don't think there's any doubt that to this point in his career, he hasn't really lived up to the hype outside of that shining moment in the Sugar Bowl. And we've seen in OU history that big-time moments in the Sugar Bowl don't always translate to careers.
All right, guys, as we mentioned earlier, Florida Atlantic still, as of last check before we started rolling tape, does not have a starting quarterback yet. We know there are 3 guys that are Division I transfers into that program or had Division I days.
Yeah. I should have said Power 5 earlier when I said Division I.
Right. Well, yeah, but point well taken. But 3 guys that have at least been attached and been on campus of a Power 5 at some point. We kind of assume that DeAndre Johnson, just because he's the Florida State guy who showed such promise, was a really highly touted recruit before he got in trouble, ended up at East Mississippi Community College, Last Chance U. But, Barry, the fact that we don't know, is it a big deal at this point?
Oh, it's a big deal if you're a Florida Atlantic fan. I don't see where it's a big deal to OU fans. DeAndre Johnson, Chris Robinson, 2 guys that really haven't played on the major college level. So who knows which one's better? Lane Kiffin probably knows what he thinks. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's going to play them both. I don't know. Can't get too worked up about that if you're the Sooners. Sooners are better than Florida Atlantic. They should dominate the game. This is a team that had a good offense last year, but the quarterback is gone for Florida Atlantic. So this is not need to focus, need to play well, but worrying about who the quarterback is seems counterproductive.
Is that really, is that what it comes down to in your mind, Ryan? I think several defensive guys this week have talked about the fact that they've watched the scheme, they've seen film from last year. Yeah, you don't know who the quarterback's going to be, and there may be some variations, but what Lane Kiffin does, and that has to be what they're looking at right now.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about an offense with a running back like Devin Singletary and what he can do. He rushed for over 1,900 yards a year ago, 30-plus touchdowns, just a fantastic runner. There's some questions about their offensive line, but you pretty well know what Lane Kiffin's offense is going to look like. The question is just going to be which of those quarterbacks is going to run it. But I don't think this game is going to come down to what happens at quarterback for Florida Atlantic. I think there's a couple other factors that are going to be decisive here.
And we'll talk about that in a second. But when it comes to quarterbacks, regardless of who Florida Atlantic trots out, as you guys mentioned, not a ton of experience at a big level. Kyler Murray's going to be out there for the Sooners. He's had some obviously major college experience at at Texas A&M. Let's get the right state here.
Not the Rattlers.
Not the Rattlers, the Aggies. But he hasn't played. He hasn't started in this kind of capacity in a long time, Barry. There's some juice in this quarterback matchup to me.
Oh, yeah. We don't know how good Kyler Murray's going to be. Now, there's a reason to be optimistic. He was a fabulous high school kid. He was good enough to warrant 3 starts at A&M as a true freshman. They don't go around passing that job out easy. So there's lots of promise around Kyler Murray. But we still don't know how he will perform and how he will react to the pressure. Replacing Baker Mayfield is not easy. That's going to be tough duty. He's going to be compared to Baker. That's a very high standard. I think he'll do well, but we don't know. We'll find out. Florida Atlantic's defense shouldn't be that big of a test. If Kyler Murray struggles here, it is a concern for this Oklahoma football team going forward.
Ryan, you mentioned Florida Atlantic's got quite a run game. Well, Oklahoma's got some weapons around Kyler Murray as well. I don't know if that sways ultimately. You just give Oklahoma such an advantage with that. But when it comes down to breaking in a quarterback, Oklahoma's in a pretty good spot with the guys around Kyler Murray.
Yeah, they've got 2 things that you really want when you're breaking in a new quarterback, and one is a fantastic offensive line. We talked about position battles. There's still some questions there over what the pieces are going to be, but out of 6 guys, who 5 of them are going to be, and they're going to be a really good group of guys to protect Kyler Murray. And then you've got a really good running back in Rodney Anderson, who started off slow last year, was buried on the depth chart, but we've talked about this for the last couple of months, just rose up and grabbed hold of that number 1 job. He's going to be their workhorse, and he's going to give Oklahoma's offense a little bit of a chance to grow into Kyler Murray, give Kyler Murray a chance to get a little bit more comfortable with game speed as Oklahoma's season moves along.
When you talk about guys that things that this game will come down to. I think a guy like Rodney Anderson is probably in the mix there. But something else this game is going to probably come down to are the play callers. When you're talking about Lane Kiffin on Florida Atlantic sideline and Lincoln Riley on OU sideline, Barry, again, when it comes to sort of fun, I mean, yeah, this has got a lot of juice to it, but it is really going to be telling. What are these guys going to try to do with another young, quote-unquote, mastermind on the other sideline?
Well, what's interesting to me about Lane Kiffin is how old he is for how young he is. I mean, he's in his
he's 42.
He's older than Tom Herman, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
So we don't think of Tom Herman as that young of a guy. So Lane Kiffin's just been around a long time. He was Lincoln Riley before there was a Lincoln Riley in terms of getting a great coaching job, the Oakland Raiders, at 31. So he was once a whippersnapper, not so much anymore. And he's sort of on the rebound trying to get his career going back up. Some young guns, Lincoln Riley, the chief among them, has sort of taken over that mantle. But Lane Kiffin clearly has the offensive resume to impress you, both in the NFL, then at Southern Cal, going to Alabama. Nick Saban, not in the business of hiring knuckleheads. He's a pretty serious-minded guy. So we think of Lane Kiffin as sort of a goofball. But he worked for Nick Saban, so that proves that he's got his serious moments.
Well, although let's remember how that tenure ended there.
Well, it ended the only way it was ever going to end. But he kept him around for a couple of years. So Lane Kiffin will have his guys lined up. They will have all kinds of tricks. They'll have all kinds of wrinkles. We'll see if they can dent that Sooner defense.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how much. I mean, not only does Lane Kiffin, we know he's got a lot in the bag, but how many tricks does he pull out, Ryan? I mean, this is a Florida Atlantic team ranked in the top 25, down in that 23-24 range, depending on who you look at. One of those non-Power 5 conference teams that, if they win on Saturday, they're maybe trying to make a push for a playoff spot because of the competition that sets out in front of them. Does that just mean the bag of tricks gets dumped out on Owen Field and we see everything Lane Kiffin's got?
Yeah, I think he's going to pull out everything that he can do to try to win this game because of how important it is for their future. Now, I don't know even if they go undefeated if they're going to be in the playoff, but certainly that group of 5 spot, when you talk about the New Year's Six Bowls, they've got a great shot at that. I think Boise State's ahead of them in the rankings and Central Florida, but they're right there in that mix. So I don't think there's any doubt that Lane Kiffin is going to do everything that he can to try to win this game. All
right, guys, we're going to finish with a couple things. You got to answer some fill in the blank for me. The first one being, Ryan, we're going to start with you. When it comes to Florida Atlantic, OU should be what? Fill in the blank.
Mildly concerned.
Okay.
I think that with a player like Devin Singletary on their offense, with a play caller like Lane Kiffin on the other sideline, I think you've got to be at full focus for a game like this, especially with the problems that Oklahoma's had against the run, the problems that Oklahoma's had in the front 7 the last couple of years. Yes, they feel better about both of those spots, but is that going to be better? Are we going to see it better on Saturday? I think if Devin Singletary is able to go off, that goes a long way toward the possibility of Florida Atlantic pulling off an upset.
Mildly concerned. Barry, where are you landing on what OU should be?
I would say they should be focused. If they're focused, everything should be fine. Oklahoma's a lot better, particularly on the lines. I mean, Florida Atlantic doesn't have linemen that can stand up to that OU offensive line. Sooners should be able to just run their way to victory in this game if they're focused. If you're not focused, then things could happen. No reason not to be focused on the season opener. These guys work 300 days a year so that on 12 Saturdays they can go out and have fun. This is one of those days of fun.
All right, we've talked about all of the sort of sidelights of this game. So fill in this blank, Ryan. This game really comes down to
whether Kyler Murray makes mistakes. I think there's only 2 things that could help Florida Atlantic pull out the upset here, and that's Devin Singletary just going off, I mentioned that earlier, and Kyler Murray making mistakes that put him in bad position. If Kyler Murray takes care of the ball, relies on Rodney Anderson, then this thing's going to be fine, and Oklahoma's going to move on to next week.
We saw that equation play out a couple years ago when OU went down to Houston, and they did not have a mistake-free day from one Baker Mayfield. Lost that game. Barry, what is it for you? What does this game come down to?
I think it comes down to talent. Florida Atlantic has some elite talent, but it's not big numbers. We're talking 4 or 5 guys. Best 50 players on the field, 45 of them are going to be Sooners. So this is a game where the talent level, Oklahoma, just by playing a moderately good game, should prevail. Play well, you should win going away.
All right, we'll see how it all goes on Saturday. Again, kick time is 11, so get up, get going. If you're headed to Norman or you're watching on TV, if you're watching on TV, that's Fox. But be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.